Hello everyone and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we look at daily quiz for 31st of March 2024. So let's begin with the first question. Consider the following statements about BrahMos missiles. Now why are we talking about BrahMos missiles? Because this is in the newspaper today in the Indian Express. BrahMos deal is the beginning of further defense pacts between India and Philippines. Now there is one whole page that has been dedicated today in the Indian Express only between India and Philippines relation. There are two articles there and I would say that both of these articles are good articles to read. The first one talks about the various facets of the relations that we have between India and Philippines, and then there is this second article that we have with regard to the BrahMos missile deal that we have between India and Philippines. So let's look at the question. The first statement says it is a subsonic cruise missile developed jointly by Russia and India. Now in this case, when it comes to this statement, cruise missile is correct, but it is not subsonic. It is one of the fastest cruise missiles of the world, and that's why it is a supersonic cruise missile. It is a supersonic cruise missile, and the latest version, that is BrahMos 2, is even hypersonic in nature. So that's why subsonic, meaning that it has a speed less than the speed of sound. That's not correct. It has a speed more than the speed of sound. So that's why calling it subsonic would be wrong. Second statement, the missile can be launched from submarines, ships, aircraft or land platforms. This is correct. We have various different versions of BrahMos and we have made sure that we can launch it from any one of these platforms. And then it is a part of India's integrated guided missile development program. Now this is wrong. As a part of India's integrated guided missile development program, there were 5 missiles that we started with. We had Prithvi, we had Agni, we had Trishul, we had Nag and we had Akash. So these were the 5 missiles as a part of integrated guided missile development program. BrahMos not a part of it. So only one statement given here is correct. So correct answer will be A. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following statements are true regarding brain stroke? Now, why are we speaking of brain stroke? Because we have this article in the Indian Express today. At 28, this techie survives 4 brain strokes. Now, when it comes to brain strokes, normally it is said to be one of the diseases that happens with age, that will happen to people who are old. But of late, we have seen a trend that where we see that there are a lot of people who have been suffering from stroke even though they are not even 40 years of age. And that is what this article is about, and how we have been talking about certain case studies of brain stroke in people who are young. So that is basically what it talks about. Now let's look at the question. A stroke occurs when blood supply to part of your brain is interrupted or reduced, preventing brain tissue from getting oxygen and nutrients. Now this is correct, and in this context there are actually 2 types of brain strokes which have been mentioned in the second statement, that one is ischemic and second one is hemorrhagic. Now when it comes to these 2 types, there are these 2 types, and this is correct that there are these 2 types. And if you look at this, these are the 2 types of strokes. So first is ischemic, and in the case of ischemic, what we see is that it is a kind of stroke where we see that the blood vessels get blocked. And the second one is the hemorrhagic, and this is where we see that the blood vessels are ruptured. So there are 2 types of cases. Now this type, almost 85% of the stroke cases are of the first type, and only a fewer number of cases are of the second type. So just remember that there are these 2 types. So this is correct. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking, obesity, diabetes are some of the leading risk factors for stroke. This is correct. And that's why we see that there are leading number of people who are below 40 years of age, yet they have been suffering with stroke, because we see that these kind of neurological conditions, they happen because of all these various different diseases. And that's why these diseases, they are also called as lifestyle diseases. They are also called as lifestyle diseases for a simple fact that we see that because of wrong lifestyle practices or bad lifestyle practices, we see that there is a a significant significant increase in the number of these incidences among people who are young, whether it is about obesity or the cholesterol related problems or even diabetes related problems have been seen to be higher in cases of people who are young of late. Stroke increases the likelihood of developing dementia. This is correct that this happens, and especially in the people who are old, we see that one of the major risk factors of dementia is stroke. So that's why all these four statements given here are correct. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following best describes the term gross domestic product or GDP? Now, why are we talking about? Because this is a news article in every newspaper in today's every one of today's newspapers, in the Hindu, Indian Express, and all the other newspapers as well. GDP growth in financial year 24 seen at 8% or more on average, says Sitaraman. Now, in this regard, when it comes to GDP, let's take a simple question based on the definition of GDP itself. First is the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period, regardless of the ownership. Second is the total value of all the goods and services produced by nationals of a country on its lands and on foreign land. Now, this is correct. Sorry, this is wrong, because on foreign land will not be considered. Only within the boundaries of a country will be considered. So that's why this is wrong. The total market value of all the intermediate goods produced within the country. So first, not intermediate. Second, not only goods but also services. So that's why C is also wrong. The sum of all the personal consumption expenditures, business investments, and government spending, excluding net exports of a country in a given period. Now, this is also not correct. So that's why in this regard, the correct answer is the first option given to you. The total market value of all the final goods and services produced within a country in a given period, regardless of the ownership. So that's why correct answer will be A. So that's it. This is how we define GDP: the total monetary or market value of all the finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. This is how you define GDP. Sometimes, see, there are these kind of questions which are very basic in nature that they ask you sometimes. So don't think that it's always going to be a very complex question that will come in your paper. So let's look at question number 4. Consider the following statements. Now, this is about FATF. Now, why FATF? Because we see this news article in the Hindu today. Many countries yet to fully implement steps to prevent misuse of virtual assets, says FATF. Now, virtual assets, basically the things which are virtual in nature and yet they are counted as an asset. So, for example, a cryptocurrency. All right. So, these kind of assets have not been completely, steps to implement to prevent the misuse of virtual assets have yet not been prevented well, or have not been taken well into account according to FATF. So, Financial Action Task Force, which looks after money laundering and terrorist financing and everything related to the issues related to these two areas. So, let's look at the question. First is, a country's placement on the FATF's grey list automatically triggers economic sanctions from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Now, this is wrong. It does not automatically trigger anything. It is something that we'll have to do. We'll have to take a step and we'll have to take a decision whether we want to do that or not. So, this is wrong. The FATF recommendations are legally binding on the members of the countries, requiring them to implement necessary legislative changes to comply. Now, this is also wrong, that it's not something which is legally binding in these cases. So that's why this is also not correct. Now, this is an intergovernmental organization established by the G7 summit in Paris in 1989 to combat money laundering and terror funding. Now, just remember this, that initially when it was founded, it was only to combat money laundering. When it comes to terror funding, this was added later. This was added later, all right. So it was not added at the time when it was formed, all right. It was made a part of this FATF at a later stage. So that's why it was not essentially when it was established, it was not for terror funding, it was added later. So all the three statements given here are not correct. So correct answer will be D. Moving on to the previous year question, and this was asked in your 2018 paper. Momentum for Change Climate Neutral Now is an initiative launched by. Now, we have been talking about climate neutrality, and especially in case of carbon, we have been talking about how we need to reduce to zero emission goals. We need to have zero emission goals, and India has zero emission goals, and other countries also, they have zero emission goals. And this is something that was launched by UNFCCC. So this was a question that was asked in your, a factual question that was asked in your 2018 paper. Now let's finally come to the fact of the day, and the fact of the day is about neurodiversity. Now, why neurodiversity? Again, there is an article that we have in the Indian Express today, neurodiversity at work. Now, what do we mean by neurodiversity? Now, in case of neurodiversity, you can say that it's a concept, or it's kind of a social movement where we are looking at understanding and acceptance of the diverse range of neurocognitive functionalities that humans have. That we should identify the issues, we should understand the issues, and not attach stigma to a lot of these neurological problems or issues. So that's why it considers basically a lot of different types of neurological conditions, and how exactly it also becomes responsibilities of others at workplace to manage all these problems that they see in their co-workers, and there should be a better acceptance towards neurodiversity. Just like how we have seen that there are movements towards understanding and acceptance of people coming from different races, coming from different communities, and also acceptance of sexuality at workplace. Similarly, neurodiversity talks about different neurological conditions and how we need to have an understanding and acceptance of the same. So that's why, by promoting a more inclusive and accepting view of the neurological differences, it is a movement to reduce the stigma, improve support and accommodations for neurodivergent individuals, and celebrate the unique contributions they make to the society. Now, this month basically is Autism Acceptance Month, and that's why in that context this article has been published in the Indian Express. So that's why there are various different things that can be talked about when it comes to neurodiversity, and we need to have an acceptance of all these conditions so that we can accommodate better in the workplace. So this is basically what this particular article talks about. So this is it for today's session. I hope this session was helpful for you. Thank you very much for being here.